If you're eating clean, training hard, but you're still not losing more belly fat, and you feel like it should be working by now, you're probably in the phase where most men quit. And if you don't understand this, you will burn out, get stuck, or give up completely. So I'll break down exactly what this phase is, why it feels so frustrating, and what you need to know to push through to reach 15% body fat or below and keep it off. The first thing to point out is that most men don't struggle to start losing fat. Just cleaning up your diet, training a bit harder, cutting back on the obvious stuff like sugar, alcohol, snacks, and bam, the scale drops pretty quickly, which feels motivating, so it can feel like you've got it all figured out. But then the problems begin, because that early drop is mostly glycogen and water, less food in the body. And this can easily set the wrong expectation. You think fat loss should keep working like this, but then it doesn't. And that's where most men are misled, and what happens next catches most guys off guard. You could call this phase the messy middle, because it's usually somewhere between that 18 to 22% body fat. You can eat healthy every day, hit the gym 5 days a week, do cardio, and the scale barely moves. Your effort is high, but it feels like there's a big gap between the work you're putting in and the actual results you expect to see, which feels unfair. And this is the phase where most men will fall off the wagon despite doing all the right things, because the frustration builds, and if a busy week, travel, or events hit, it's easy to burn out, lose motivation, and then rebound. However, if you tweak your strategy and push through this phase to get lean, it's also very unlikely that you'll undo all the hard work and regain all the weight later. So it's a critical point in this phase. Problem is, most busy guys never get past this next part. The fat loss doesn't happen in a straight line. You might hit a new low today, then you might not hit a new low for days, weeks, potentially sometimes longer. And normally your weight is always fluctuating due to the obvious things like water, food, glycogen, digestion, inflammation. But there's another one that most guys miss. For example, say you burn the same amount of calories daily, then you eat 1,700 calories from Monday to Friday. Then on Saturday and Sunday, you eat 2,000 and 2,500. That means your weekly average is 1,857, which can seem fine because you ate clean during the week. However, Saturday added an extra 300 calories and Sunday added an extra 800 calories. So by Monday, you're starting the week with 1,100 calories behind, if 1,700 is your actual budget. And it takes days to repay that debt by being in a bigger deficit. Then if a high day hits again, it keeps delaying the repayment of that calorie surplus from the previous week, which is why you can see a new low on a Friday and then be up 2 to 4 pounds or kilos after the weekend. And that is where the doubt starts kicking in. But what most men don't realize is that fat loss can still be happening under the surface if you compensate and stay in that weekly average deficit range that you're in. However, very high calorie days will spike the scale and delay the visible progress. And this is where most guys try to solve the wrong problem. At this point, most men try to cut out foods, train more, add more cardio. They think they need to change their whole plan or try something new, or even jump on things like GLP-1s or TRT or whatever is hot right now. But that's not the real problem. It's a bit like investing. Say that you are dollar cost averaging. There's going to be periods where it looks like you're losing money. And if you assume it's not working and you quit, you'll pull everything out at a loss. Before I figured out fat loss and muscle building, I was hopping from diet to diet, workout style to different exercises, always looking for the next best plan, thinking the next one will fix it. But all I was really doing was not sticking to it for long enough. Eventually, it clicked that fat loss isn't just a physical transformation. It is also a mental one, even if you can't see the instant progress day to day. But I assume you're not a full-time athlete, and here's where this phase can get even harder. This can feel like a disadvantage because you've got work stress, decisions, responsibilities on your shoulders, family, kids, social events, and just less time, probably interrupted sleep, and all the other dramas we have to deal with. Then you're not doing this in a perfect environment like a pro athlete or a young guy living at home with fewer responsibilities, which means even if you are doing the right things, you're doing them under pressure. There's just less room for error. Yet at the same time, you want to see faster results, which creates the gap between your expectations and the reality. And it makes this phase more frustrating and easier to quit, especially when you can't string together a perfect week. Many high-performing people tend to think, if I'm doing this much, I should see even more results, which yes, works in business and it works in your career, but doesn't always work with physiology. You don't need to be perfect. I've worked with guys with big families who travel for work often or events, have full schedules, and they still train 2 to 3 times a week, built muscle, and got lean. But it didn't happen in 1 to 2 months. And this is exactly why you need to avoid this next trap, because it's what makes men throw the towel in, or worse, gamble with their health. So many gurus or just uneducated people will say things like, your metabolism crashed, your hormones are trash, you have fat genes. And when progress slows down or gets stuck, it's very easy to believe those comments, like something must be wrong with you. But most of the time, that is not actually the issue, at least not to the extent that it's the main thing holding you back from losing belly fat. Because I've coached guys who had everything working against them, yet they still got lean and built more muscle. So what's really happening is the delay between the work you're doing and when you're seeing the outcome. And that delay can grab onto you and drag you down into a deep pit of despair, like the Balrog that grabbed Gandalf's ankle and pulled him down in Lord of the Rings. My point is, instead of panicking about slow results, if you double down on your data and you properly go into the nuance and the details, you can spot exactly what is going on, where your bottlenecks are, and what needs some tweaking and adjusting to keep the progress moving forward and ultimately return like Gandalf the gains. However, most men don't do that. When the doubt hits, they avoid the nuance and start doing this next thing that keeps them stuck on the yo-yo train for years. Once you notice this, you can see it pretty much everywhere. In fitness, business, relationships, everything. People jumping from one thing to the next, instead of putting the reps in, they replay the loop of starting, stopping, restarting, thinking they've found the right thing, but never giving anything enough time to actually work. This is also called shiny object syndrome. And it's like if you start something new and then you see someone else with the results that you want, then you see how they did it and it's different to what you're doing. So you assume that their way must be better, and then you jump fence hoping for greener pastures. But the grass is always greener where you water it. Switching your diet or your workouts too early is like hitting the reset button on your momentum. And if your diet and your workouts were built properly from the beginning, there should only be minor tweaks to make along the whole journey, never a complete overhaul. And this doesn't just happen when people are in this early phase of fat loss. There's a critical point in this middle phase we're talking about that catches guys, even if they're seeing results. This is where things get even more frustrating. So around the 20% body fat mark, things start to feel very repetitive. You're eating the same types of meals, you're hitting the same step targets, similar workouts, week after week. And because you already have results from earlier on, now it feels like you're doing the same thing like a robot and progress is much slower than you'd like it to be. And you start looking for something new to speed it up. When in reality, the phase could already be working fine, but it's the boredom that starts to poke at you and frustrate you. But the thing is, I see boredom as part of the solution. If something works, you don't break it. Boredom is a strong sign that your program is dialed in to your lifestyle. So getting lean isn't about having fun. It's really about doing what works in a predictable, sustainable way. Also, the fact is there is nothing new. What worked 50 years ago works today. Guys who constantly seek new information and avoid the basics are the ones who look the same year after year in the gym. But even when you hit 15% body fat or less than that, you might be surprised it is not what you initially thought. So if you haven't been at 15% body fat before, or not for a long time, it's hard to visualize what it actually looks like for you specifically. Most guys way overestimate it because they're comparing themselves to people who are online, who've been training for years and look like a magazine cover model. Or worse, you compare yourself to younger guys who are at their peak testosterone, with more time to train and recover, and in some cases aren't even natural. So you start thinking, I should be further along than where I am now, even though you're much leaner than you used to be. And it feels disheartening, and it can crush your confidence in the approach that you have that's already working. But you need to accept that everyone is playing a different game, different lifestyle, stress, time availability, and their experience and age. So it's not a fair comparison when you keep measuring yourself against the wrong standards. Everything feels slower or further away, when in reality, you're exactly where you should be, given the conditions that you're operating under today. When you accept that, you're less likely to quit before this next thing will impact you. There are times where fat loss progress actually isn't slow or gradual. Occasionally, it builds under the surface and then suddenly shows up, which is why you can look the same for weeks or months and then see a very noticeable change in a short period of time. This is also called the whoosh effect, where things are stalled or life has been getting in the way, and then finally things fall into place, you hit some consistency, and then suddenly new milestones just appear in front of your eyes, but only because you stayed on the path. The problem is most men quit before that happens because of everything we just spoke about. In reality, if you had all the data in front of you, you would see that you've always been on track, or at least consistent to what you're doing, and doing it at your own pace. And when you actually look that closely at the data, most guys uncover something they didn't expect. So if you're losing weight, but it's very slow, almost flat, and you feel like you're doing all the right things, then you're still actually in a deficit, but it's just not as big as what you think it is. It's not always the big things that slow down the progress. It's the small ones that add up over time. The things that are hidden, like oils and butters, sauces, snacks on the weekend, liquid calories, and all this doesn't feel like much in the moment, but it can crush your deficit more than you imagine. There's also common tracking errors like logging cooked weights instead of raw, getting portions wrong, picking a dodgy option that is underestimated inside of MyFitnessPal or whatever you're tracking with. And so without tracking accurate data, you just won't spot these errors. And without that clarity and confidence, you can make emotional decisions and quit way too soon. But once you bite the bullet, track your food, your steps, your recovery, your training properly, use a fitness device and apps like MyFitnessPal or whatever works for you, you'll tighten up, you'll connect the dots, and you'll know exactly what to fix. So if you're in this phase right now, doing the work, but you're not seeing the results that you expect, and you want to fix this properly, there's a link below the video where you can see exactly how I help clients one-to-one get six-pack lean using my metabolic recomp method. It's a data-driven approach to reach your peak shape with a system that you can actually predict and control around your lifestyle. This fat loss phase where most men quit is this 18 to 22% range. But in my experience, most people don't know what body fat they truly are right now, so they set the wrong starting point and the wrong goals. So if you don't know what your body fat level is currently at or what you should be aiming for, go watch this video next here where I break down different levels of body fat, what they actually look like, so that you can set a more accurate target and starting point from today.